Charlie Munger said, "Show me the incentive and I will show you the outcome." Also, Jeff Bezos built Amazon on the principle that compensation should align with the long-term value creation, not short-term incentives. They are both right. Incentives really run the world in business, in relationships, in everything we do. So I used this principle from these billionaires for one of my companies, and it doubled our monthly revenue within 2 months. Here's exactly what we implemented and what you can steal for your business. First, A players don't want a job. They want a vehicle for income generation and wealth creation for themselves. They want to be rewarded for the value they create, not the hours they work. So if you go back to the first principles, if incentives run the world, there is a question. What incentive would attract and retain the best people? And also, second question, what structure would align their success with the company's success? That led me to create this 4-layer incentive structure that we implemented for our company. We implemented this first across the sales team, also with our new CFO. So let me break down how this works. Layer 1 is your foundation, which is typically the base compensation or base salary. Most roles, maybe except some sales roles, have the base pay. This shouldn't be just about the average market rate. In simple terms, what base pay means is about buying focused attention on a specific outcome. So here is what we have done. We identified one core metric for each role, just one. So for sales, it's upfront cash collected. So it's not meeting booked, not close rate, not show rate, not proposal sent, nothing like that. But it's actual cash in the bank. For our CFO, for example, it's enterprise value growth, because that captures everything that matters. It captures the profit growth, number of completed deals, integration between those deals, everything that matters in acquisitions. For operations, it can be, for example, gross margin, the actual profitability of what you deliver. Then we tie the compensation to baseline performance on that metric, which means this is the KPI you are responsible for and getting paid for. The key insight from here is that the metric must be 100% within their control. If someone cannot directly influence it, it shouldn't determine their compensation. Layer below that is performance multipliers, or we call them accelerators. What I learned here is annual or quarterly bonuses don't change behavior that much, especially when it comes to sales roles. They are too distant or too abstract for people. So for example, for my sales team, we implemented weekly performance bonuses. Again, it starts with a North Star metric, which is upfront cash collected. Then you set a baseline as a minimum KPI they have to collect each week, for example, $30,000. If they hit 120% of that metric, we increase their commission structure by 2%. If they hit it by 200%, we add additional commission percentages. And specifically for role like sales, where most guys have short-term view, you need to reset and incentivize them weekly. Even monthly can be too distant for these specific roles. For other roles, it's a little different. One more thing I want to mention, you shouldn't have caps on the revenue-generating roles, because caps tell your people to stop trying and doing more. Another useful thing you can implement is we have weekly competitions. So whoever performs best for that week get immediate bonus, typically like $1,000 in cash or something similar. So when people see uncapped upside to their performance, they think like owners, not like employees. And this is what attracts A players. They see a structure where their talent directly translates to income generation and wealth creation. And that builds also a really strong collaborative and competitive structure that helps everyone within the company. In one of my previous videos, maybe 3 or 4 videos before, I mentioned that life is all about making progress, and progress is what drives us. So set incentives in a way that helps people make progress in life. By the way, if this sounds interesting to you, there is a link below. If you want to speak to me or my team, there should be somewhere link below that you can click. Layer 3 is equity and long-term alignment. This is very separate the good companies from the great ones, but the timing of this really matters. So if you are still under like that 5 million or so in revenue, focus on the cash compensation first, as your equity doesn't really have value because it's illiquid and your company is not really sellable. But once you hit scale, equity becomes the secret sauce for retention of the key personnel or key talent. But what I recommend here is having performance-based vesting. Traditional vesting of equity is just time-based. So for example, if you stay 5 years at the company, you get equity in the business. That doesn't always drive the behavior you want. The structure that I prefer ties vesting to hitting specific milestone. For example, for our CFO, it's tied to enterprise value targets. So let's say you allocate 5% of equity to the CFO role. The person doesn't get 5% from day one. It unlocks after certain milestones are met, which they can actually control and have influence Amazon. So let's say once we hit 20 million in profit, 30% of this equity, of this 5% pool, get unlocked. Another 20% gets unlocked at 50 million profit, and then let's say another 20% gets unlocked at 100 million profit. You can also have acceleration triggers, which means if we hit our ultimate goal or major exit or going public or something, it accelerates unvested shares. For other key roles, you can use something called phantom equity. Phantom equity is basically fake shares that pay out real money. Your key employees get units that track the value of your company, but they don't actually own shares. So let's say you give someone 1% in phantom equity of your company. The company, let's say it's worth 10 million. That 1% is worth currently $100,000. So 2 years later, you double the company to 20 million in profit. That phantom equity is now worth $200,000. So when there is exit or some share buyback, they get paid the cash value of their phantom units. So in this case, it will be 200K. They get the same financial upside if they owned real shares, but without the complexity. Why this is better than the typical real equity for most roles? First, it's simple. There are no complicated shareholder structures and agreements, no voting rights, and also no tax headaches for them until they get actually paid the cash. Second, you keep full control. They participate in the financial upside, but you are not diluting yourself and your ownership and your decision-making power. And third, it's flexible. You can always design vesting schedules or some performance triggers or even partial buybacks down the road, so they get some liquidity over time. This creates people who think and act like owners because they benefit like owners. Remember that thing that I mentioned at the beginning about Jeff Bezos. They are also not trapped. They are building their wealth alongside the business. That means when the company wins, they win as well. So they are incentivized to help it grow. And then the last layer, which is kind of unusual and non-monetary incentives. So for example, A players, they prefer autonomy, right? So give them some certain decision-making rights. Map out exactly what each key person or department can decide on independently, because nothing frustrates A players more or the best talent more than needing approval for every specific small thing. The second thing can be, for example, time independence, but you have to be really careful with this one. So for example, if they hit the one metric they have consistently, they can control their work schedule, work from anywhere, work from home. Maybe they can take one work day a week off or something like that. As people generally value freedom and growth as much as money. Now, the secret that makes all of this work is one metric principle. Every role gets one primary metric that defines success. So it's not 5 dashboards or some scorecards, it's one number. This can be anything set by you, but think from first principles, what actually matters and drives the growth and outcome you want. So for example, like I mentioned, for sales, it can be upfront cash collected. For CFO, it can be enterprise value growth. For operations, it can be gross margin, right? For marketing, something they can influence is qualified leads. That's the metric they can actually influence. For them, any other metric is secondary. Of course, people need to be professional, follow processes, be good humans, but their incentive is tied to one thing. And the reason for that is clarity drives performance. When someone knows exactly what their success looks like, they optimize for it naturally. And this also makes your hiring easier. You can tell candidates exactly what they are being paid for or what they are being accountable for. A players really like this. B players, maybe not so much, but you don't want B players in your company anyway. So let me show you how to actually implement this step by step in a few weeks. In week 1, we can start with identify the one metric for each role, a metric that actually improves everything else. That includes also metric for you as a founder. In week 2 to 4, adjust the current pay structure to be tied to the core metric that you assign to this specific role. And then in week 4 and onwards, add multipliers and accelerators. Keep them simple at the beginning and maybe assign them to only a couple of people, test them with them, how it works, for a couple of weeks, couple of months, and then roll out it to the whole company and iterate based on feedback. Remember, you can be already doing well with your company before implementing this. And this isn't about fixing something broken. It's more like adding fuel to the fire, taking something good and making it even better, like exceptional type of company. Here is what this actually creates. First, you attract people you couldn't access before. A players that wouldn't return your emails or messages before would actually want to work with you right now. Second, your existing team will perform better and at a completely different level, not because you are pushing them, but because the structure pulls them forward. And third, everyone knows exactly how to win. The companies that are doing the best typically have really good incentive. They build structures that creates compound growth. So if this video was helpful in any way, if you are running a business and want to either grow organically or maybe by acquisitions, or you want to discuss how you can implement these incentives, there will be a link somewhere below this video, depends where you are watching it, or go to the website Global Digital Group. You can speak to my team or DM me on LinkedIn and we can chat. See you in the next video.